The Lubavitcher Rebbe had a custom to teach a nigun, a Hasidic melody, very, very early in the morning on Simchat Torah from the years 1954 to 1963. And during that time, in that 10-year period, he taught 13 distinctive melodies. And with each melody, he told a story or attached a teaching that gave voice to the sentiments and the ideas behind that melody. In 1961, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, the Rebbe taught a melody that accompanied the words of a famous liturgical hymn called Anim Zemirot. And the words of the nigun, translated in English, read, "I will compose pleasant songs and weave poems because my soul longs for you. My soul desires the shadow of your hand, to know every one of your secrets." And in introducing the nigun, the Rebbe told the following story about the origin of this particular melody. He told a story about Jews coming to their synagogue on the day after Yom Kippur. So they arrive for the morning service for Shacharit, 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, early in the morning. It's in a European shtetl. And they arrive only to find a member of the community circling around the bima, circling around the central podium of the synagogue, engrossed and immersed in this particular melody. He's still wearing his kittel, the white shroud-like garment that men wear in Yom Kippur. He's still wearing his talit. He still hasn't broken his fast. And he is dancing around the bima, singing this melody. Hasn't eaten for about a day and a half, over 36 hours. The Rebbe related this story. He taught the melody, and he explained that when a Jew is so engrossed in Yom Kippur that he completes Yom Kippur with such joy at having been locked in union with the divine, he can't tear himself away. So he continues to meditate, he continues to communicate, he continues with his soul afire, singing, until he's basically yanked out of that bubble. And the Rebbe said that's what happened to that Jew. He still felt this incredible longing to get yet closer to the divine. Now, many Hasidim that were there mused that the Rebbe was actually speaking about himself, that the story was autobiographical, and he was telling his story. He was the Jew who had been locked in this meditative trance and was still going on Yom Kippur energy until the next morning. Years later, a Hassid by the name of Reuven Dunin, who had a very interesting and unique relationship with the Rebbe. The Rebbe actually told him, "You can come into my room anytime you want." So he knocked on the door and he said, "Rebbe, I have a question. You know that story you told about the Hassid that kept singing a nigun hours after Yom Kippur until the next morning when people came for the morning service? They say that you were talking about yourself. Is that true?" And the Rebbe said, "No. Let me disabuse you of that idea. It was certainly not me. I will tell you the story of that Jew." And the Rebbe began the story by saying that this story concerned a Jew who lived before the time of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. He lived in Russia. He was a Jew of some means, and he was particularly drawn to the mitzvah of ransoming Jews who had been imprisoned. And unfortunately, that was not a rare occasion. So the way it worked is there was this Poritz, this really rich landowner, and every Poritz had their own fiefdom. And invariably, there would be a Jew who just didn't have the money to pay rent. And after some time, the Poritz would throw this Jew into a dungeon. And this guy that the Rebbe told the story about would rustle up the funds to ransom the Jew and get him out of the dungeon. And he did this for years. On one occasion, a Jew was imprisoned. He was thrown into a dungeon. And this Jew came to the Poritz, to the landowner, and he said, "I'm here to ransom this Jew you just threw into the dungeon." And the Poritz, realizing that this was a good business, said to this guy, "That's fine, but this particular person, it's going to cost you 1,000,000 ruble. 1,000,000 ruble he did not have. He was very, very disturbed. This was the first time that he could not do this special mitzvah called Pidyon Shvuim, ransoming someone, bringing them back home. But he couldn't do it. 1,000,000 ruble? He doesn't have 1,000,000 ruble. He was comfortable, but he wasn't a millionaire. He wasn't a billionaire. But after he went home, his mind and his heart gave him no rest. How is it possible that he should turn his back on a Jew cast into a dungeon? And he decided that he had to liquidate everything that he had. And when he sold his home, and he sold his business, and he sold everything he owned, he was able to rustle up the 1,000,000 ruble. He came to the Poritz, and he said, "Here's your 1,000,000 ruble." And the Poritz said, "Okay, a deal is a deal. Come and I'll unlock the dungeon and you'll take your Jew home." Unfortunately, upon unlocking the dungeon, it became clear that the Jew had died. He had expired. Now, the ransomer felt awful that because he had hesitated, because he had not jumped at this chance with alacrity, his fellow Jew had died. And the Poritz said, "You still want him?" And he said to himself, "I can't make the same mistake again." The answer is yes. So, extremely disheartened, he made arrangements for the body of this Jew to be taken, and at least he got the mitzvah of bringing a Jew to proper burial. It's also a very great mitzvah. That night, he fell asleep, and in his dream, this Jew came to him and said, "Thank you. Thank you for bringing my body and my soul to Kever Yisrael. Thank you for allowing me to be buried properly. I want to reward you. I'm going to give you a choice. You can either choose to become extremely wealthy. You're going to come into riches that will completely eclipse anything you ever knew. Or you can choose to experience the world to come in your lifetime? Take a moment, consider these two choices, and let me know what you want to do. He said to his patron, I want to experience the world to come in my lifetime. And the man said, done. And the Rebbe said to Reuven Dunin, he said, and that's the story of that Jew who was singing this song, Anim Zemirot, from after Yom Kippur until the next morning when he was rudely yanked from that bubble. He was enjoying the world to come in his lifetime. The Rebbe finished the story. Reuven Dunin was nobody's fool. And he looked at the Rebbe and he said, why did the Rebbe include the detail that this was a Jew that lived before the Baal Shem Tov? In which way is that seminal? And the Rebbe didn't hesitate for a moment, looked at Reuven Dunin and he said to him, because had he lived after the Baal Shem Tov, he would never have made that choice. He would have chosen riches over experiencing the world to come in his lifetime implicitly and immediately. It would have been clear that given that choice, you choose financial resources so you can help more and more people. I lead with this poignant story because it's very clear that to the Rebbe there was only one choice for a person who was suffused with Hasidic ideals. And such a person could only, would only, should only ask for more resources. But what compels that answer? Why not choose enjoying the world to come in your lifetime? Now, generally, conventionally, we are counseled to be judicious, balanced, to stick closely to the golden rule, always make a cost-benefit analysis, hold something back, don't put everything in one basket, diversify, unless, of course, if it's about love, which is really to say it's about pleasure. And pleasure, Hasidic teachings teach, is the core, is the most transcendent aspect of our psyche. Essentially, we live our entire lives, from the youngest of ages until the day we die, in pursuit of pleasure. What distinguishes how we understand pleasure? It's not just about age. It's not just about stage. It's about how we understand what we are doing in this world. I remind you of the iconic words of the great sage John Legend. Give your all to me, and I'll give my all to you. Generally, however, giving our all is something that is difficult, even in love. It meets with all kinds of resistance from within and without. Again, in his words, it takes being crazy, out of your mind. And indeed, Hasidus teaches that we do indeed have to be crazy, out of our minds, infatuated, in love with three things: love of God, love of Torah, and love of every Jew. It takes understanding that concept to understand the truest pleasure and joy in life, and that comes from giving our all. And no one taught this and modeled this like the Rebbe did. Over and over, the Rebbe taught that a person must use all of their resources, all of their talents, all of their abilities to accomplish what they came into this world to do. In the words of the Torah, In the words of the Shema that we say over and over again every day, we have to love God, b'chol levavcha, with all of your heart, b'chol nafshecha, with all of your soul, u'v'chol me'odecha. That can be translated as all of your money, all of your resources. It can mean all of your might, but most profoundly, b'chol me'odecha means with all of your everything, with all of your veriness. I made that word up. It means you bring all of you, your entirety, to bear. In most overarching way, our souls are brought into this physical existence to transform this world into an abode, a dwelling place for the divine. Each one of us has a stake in this project, and we have to give it our all. But again, why? Who said? Why can't we just take it a bit easy, live life, be a good person, do our best? Why so extreme? Please follow along now in the sources. In a talk the Rebbe gave on Purim in 1973, the Rebbe questioned the opening words and the opening verses of the Megillah. Those verses include copious, descriptive details describing the pomp and the grandeur and the lavishness of the essentially fraternity party, the banquet bash thrown by Achashverosh. Yeah, there's more sources over here. Text 1. At that time, King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom in the capital city of Shushan. Skip to the second paragraph. He displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and the glory of his majesty. And now go to the second to last paragraph. There were spreads of white, fine cotton and blue, embroidered with cords of linen and purple, on silver rods and marble columns. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of green, white, shell, and onyx marble. Wine was served in golden goblets, each one different from the other. The royal wine was abundant in accord with the king's liberality. And it goes on and on to talk about the lavishness of this banquet. And the Rebbe says, why? I mean, just give us a few words. It was a big party, and he was generous with his resources. Why all of this descriptive detail? And I find it fascinating that to the Rebbe there is nothing in any aspect of the Torah that is not instructive. Even the doings of a buffoon-like character like Ahasuerus. Really? And yet, the Megillah goes on in describing this lavish party. And the Rebbe says, it's to teach us an incredibly important lesson. When you do something, you have to do it correctly. You have to do it completely. No meh, no ish, no comme ci, comme ça, all in, with everything you got. And if you're Ahasuerus and you have all of these resources, you can't put on a party like some plebeian millionaire. You have to do it like the billionaire you are. In other words, what's good enough for someone else might be good enough for them, but not good enough for you. And here's the Rebbe saying this in his words, text 2. When God gives a person certain means, they must execute all of their affairs in accordance with their means. One shouldn't suffice with less, even if they can still produce a wonderful event by expending only half of what their means allow them. He could have still put on a royal party, but that would not have been befitting Ahasuerus' wealth. That would not have been okay. Now, the Rebbe was, by all accounts, a radical, innovative thinker. But no matter how radical his ideas were, they were always tethered in the most traditional sources. And so the Rebbe is now going to give us, in fascinating fashion, two things from the Torah that indisputably undergird this idea that you must use every increment of what you have in service of God. Because even if what you accomplish is great, even extraordinary compared to everybody else, but if it falls short of what you can do, it's simply not okay. In fact, the Rebbe taught a radical interpretation of the term avodah zarah. Literally, that means idol worship. I know you're thinking gold, marble, onyx, right? But we know that idolatry comes in many, many forms. But here's a different way of understanding it. Zara means strange, okay? So in this understanding, avodah zarah means a strange type of worship, a strange type of service, a strange type of spiritual labor. What's strange about it? That you did it yesterday. So for today, it's not good enough. Because we're supposed to be evolving. Because we're always supposed to be going upward, higher. Yesterday was okay. But for today, it's already avodah zarah. It's strange. It's not for you. Or it could be something that's fine. It's fine for somebody else. But for you, it's zarah, it's strange. Because you can do more, because you can do better, because you can climb higher, because you can go deeper. For the Rebbe, it was very clear. If you can do something, you must do that thing. It's worth repeating. If you can accomplish something, that's because God needs you to do it. And in that case, you must do it. So this is not just for type A personalities. This is not just for overachievers. This is not just for people trying to always do more. This, for the Rebbe, was the default for every person, for everything. If you can, you must. But he was far from satisfied in just pushing us to do more, to do our utmost, to not hold back, to pour everything we got into our endeavors. He's now going to prove in his singular analysis that there is nothing extraneous in creation, there is nothing superfluous that was meted out in God's universe. Everything was created in precise fashion to serve the ultimate purpose, and therefore must be used to its maximum capacity and capability. We'll do one at a time. In two talks, one in 1981 and the other in 1982, the Rebbe decried the usage of the ubiquitous symbol in Jewish life that depicts the two tablets, the Ten Commandments, with rounded tops. Okay? That's nearly universal until the Rebbe pushed back at that. He explained that the tablets were actually square, and he drew our attention to where in the Talmud we are given this information, text 3a. The ark, the Talmud says, the ark that Moses fashioned was 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits in height. The cubit used for these measurements was the 6 handbreadths cubit. Okay, so every cubit is made of 6 handbreadths. The tablets were 6 handbreadths long, 6 handbreadths wide, and 3 handbreadths thick. The Talmud tells us exactly what these tablets look like. They are square. They are indisputably square. The Talmud continues to say the tablets were placed along the length of the ark, one next to the other. If so, how much space did the tablets consume? And we'll go back to that word in the ark. 12 handbreadths. Now let's look back to how long it was. It was 2 1/2 cubits long, which means that there were still some handbreadths left after you put the tablets in. So the Rebbe looks at this and he says, every space, every centimeter in the ark was taken up by these 2 tablets, and the remaining space was for one of the 13 Sifrei Torah, one of the 13 Torah scrolls that Moses had written for the Jewish people before he passed from this world. So one was given to each one of the 12 tribes, and one remained in the ark, against which all Torah scrolls would be checked. Because, of course, a Torah scroll has to be written in a punctilious manner. And he draws our attention to a curious term in the Talmud. If you read Hebrew, it's the 5th word from the right on the last line. 6th word, ochlot. And if you look at the last line in the English, if so, how much space did the tablets consume in the ark? Now, ochlot literally means how much space did the tablets eat up? How much space did they consume? It's a very distinctive term, says the Rebbe. And it's teaching us that there wasn't any space in the ark that wasn't consumed in precise manner. There was nothing haphazard about this, because the ark was the holiest thing. It was the epicenter. It was the nexus of all sanctity in the world. There cannot be anything extraneous. There cannot be anything superfluous when you talk about what is sanctified, what is godly. Look at text 3a in the Rebbe's own words. There is a well-known principle that God created nothing in his world in vain. Nothing was created in vain. This is all the more true regarding holy matters. It is therefore clear that the tablets filled the entire space of the ark, leaving no empty space or void remaining. For if there were an empty space, it would be in vain, God forbid. And similarly, we find that the sacred vessels sanctify their contents only when they are full. Let's read that again. Sacred vessels sanctify their contents only when they are full. It's the contra message to what society keeps telling us. Relax. Take some time out for self-care. Drop something. You're doing too much. Relax. Breathe. And the Rebbe's like, breathe and do more and walk and talk and chew gum. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, there's an easy fix. Just take on another project. That's what he advised people over and over and over again. And I'm going back to that line again. Sacred vessels sanctify their contents only when they are full. Our lives are holy, every moment we were given, every resource, and we must therefore use it as such maximally. Not satisfied, the Rebbe teaches us the same lesson in yet another way. Here, the Rebbe takes up the narrative of the gifts that were brought for the tabernacle, for the Mishkan, for the forerunner of all synagogues, by the Nesiim, by the heads of each tribe. So all the Jews were given an opportunity to donate their resources to build this tabernacle, and it was quite the project. Talk about grandeur and majesty and riches and opulence. And then comes the offering of the Nesiim, the presidents or the leaders of each tribe. Text 4a, the Torah tells us, on the day Moses finished setting up the Mishkan, the tabernacle, he anointed and consecrated it and all of its furnishings. He also anointed and consecrated the altar and all of its utensils. And then the chieftains of Israel, the heads of the families, the presidents or heads of every tribe, presented their offering. They were the ones who were present during the counting, and they brought their offering before God. And what was their offering? 6 covered wagons and 12 oxen. A wagon from every 2 chieftains, and an ox from each chieftain. And these they presented in front of the Mishkan. And the Rebbe looks at this and says, really? This is all they could rustle up? Understood. Wagons were an important accoutrement. They served a very important purpose, because this tabernacle was constantly being dismantled and re-erected. Wherever the Jews went, they took the tabernacle with them. So yes, they needed wagons for schlepping, effectively, all the stuff, the planks, the heavy bases in which the planks were placed, the curtains. There was a lot of stuff to lug. They needed wagons. But the Rebbe looks at this and says, what? 2 Nesiim, 2 chieftains, 2 presidents, 2 heads of the tribe brought 1 wagon as a gift? Seems a little parsimonious. They couldn't rustle up the necessary funds for each one of them to get their own wagon with 2 oxen each? And by the way, our tradition tells us that it was really hard to fit everything onto these 6 wagons. And not only that, we're taught that it was necessary for people to walk behind the wagon to make sure that nothing fell off. And the Rebbe looks at this and he says, how is this possible? These are the heads of the tribes. They're supposed to set an example. The Mishkan was a place of grandeur. And then when it comes to the Nesiim, the chieftains bringing their offering, all they could cough up is 1 wagon from every 2? What's going on here? And in only the way the Rebbe can, he explains in text 4b. The sages teach that God did not create anything in his world in vain. This principle applies always and everywhere, in every part and detail of creation. And this has a lesson to teach every one of us as we construct our own personal sanctuary. We must ensure that every ability that God has given us is not in vain, God forbid, but rather utilized to its fullest extent for the purpose and mission for which God created us. and that is to serve our Maker. And this applies to every power of our soul. Every single inch, every single centimeter of the wagon had to be filled up precisely and completely and repletely, because otherwise it would have been a repudiation of the space God created. After all these years on a campus, I have an algorithm down pat. The more kids tell me they're busy, the more I know they don't have a full schedule. Because the kids that have full schedules, they're not busy. They find time to do all these extracurriculars. And lately, this is what happens when you turn a certain age. And I don't have, well, I never had patience, but I'm finding myself, I'm more tolerant, but I'm less patient. And when the kids say to me, I'm so busy, and of course they're spending 14 hours on the phone, I just can't hold back from telling them, you know, when you're killing time, I just want you to know that is an actual murder, because every single increment in time has a soul. And when you don't use that moment correctly and fully, you're actually killing, you're truncating the soul of that time. I don't know that they appreciate that so much. But this is what the Rebbe's saying to us. They weren't skimping, the Nesiim, the chieftains. They were teaching us to use every single aspect of what we have maximally. We cannot waste anything. I want to concretize this with 3 extractions from letters the Rebbe wrote. And it becomes very clear that the urgency with which the Rebbe lived. Next time you watch a clip of the Rebbe at Farbrengen, note how he always sat at the edge of his chair. He never sat back. Note how even in his 80s, he walked more like a trot with such alacrity, with such urgency. And again, for the Rebbe, this was not about a personality or a lifestyle choice. It's about appreciating the riches that lie in each and every aspect of creation and using it fully and maximally. It's our holy duty, he reminded us. It's our privilege. So please, look with me at text 5a. This is an extraction from a longer letter. When we think about the world, the Rebbe says, we recognize that everything, even in the inanimate realm, is organized with strict laws. Everything has its place and its function, and there is nothing that exists without purpose. And this is certainly true for human beings who have been gifted with intellect, and therefore there is no doubt that everyone has a mission and a role in life. True, it's not always easy to find the right field and channel, but we are guaranteed that if you toil, you will succeed. We are guaranteed that if you work at this, you will find your particular gift. The complete confidence that there is something to search for, and that we were given the ability not only to search, but also to find, helps ensure the success of the search and discovery. Says the Rebbe to this individual, I am confident that with a proper search, you will find your way of influencing and contributing to your surroundings. Apparently, the Rebbe was replying to somebody who felt that they had not yet found their niche. They did not feel satisfied that they were making enough of a contribution. And the Rebbe said to them, "Know ye that there is nothing in this universe that was created without a specific purpose. And therefore, it is indisputable that you have a very important purpose, that you have a very important job to do, and knowing that will give you success in finding what that is." Look at text 5b. In this letter, the Rebbe says, think to yourself, there is so much to accomplish in this world. There is so much potential in every single person. But because of the vast amount of work to be done, we cannot afford to give up on even one capability or talent, okay? So if you're thinking, somebody else will pick up the slack, somebody else will do it, the Rebbe says, there's too much work. We need everybody all in with everything you got. He concludes, it is therefore the mission of every single person to activate all the potentials and talents they possess to improve their part of the world. And finally, text 5c. But I just want to preface with saying, October 7th was such a shock to the system because we've had a good run in the last few decades. Thank God. So being ejected so rudely and disabused of our belief that we are just part of normal, wider society, and that we've been loyal allies, and others will be our allies, and this entire narrative was so shocking to our system. And when we're not looking over our shoulders for fear that we're going to be murdered, we actually get to think about certain things. Like, how do I find happiness? I remember when one of my classmates turned 40, she threw a party, and I went to the party, and her mother was there. And her mother said, "Wo ist gehört geworden?" which is Yiddish for, "This is ridiculous. Whoever heard of such a thing? Making a party that you turned 40? Baruch Hashem, thank God she turned 40. What's this whole thing about?" Now, this is a woman who I happen to know because she was a neighbor of my father in the former Soviet Union. Every person who lived in Tashkent together had narrowly escaped death. Narrowly. In my father's case, the hospital was bombed as his mother birthed him, and she had to run from the hospital. And my mother forgot to say this on Wednesday night. He was still attached to her with umbilical cord, okay? So this woman was like, what are you guys having a party for? She took a caterer, should have given the money to charity. Was ist das? What is this? With all this rumination and all this postulation and all of this celebration, you turned 30, Baruch Hashem, go do something good. In our privilege, we have time to take our inner temperature for the good and the bad and the ugly that comes with that. And we are, as a society, in incessant and insatiable pursuit of happiness. Nothing sells more books than the pursuit of happiness. Go to any bookstore. Go on any, I challenge you. That's what people are looking for. Look at what the Rebbe teaches. There can be a twofold approach to life. A, to consider as a matter of pleasure, Consider your life as a matter of pleasure, in which case every effort should be bent towards getting the most out of life in terms of pleasure, and in every situation to seek the easiest way out. B, to consider life as a challenge and to help make a better world to live in, especially as the society in which we live is far from perfection. In this case, every effort must be bent towards this end, even if it means the sacrifice of certain personal pleasures, and even if it requires a great deal of continuous physical and mental exertion. But here's the kicker. But as a matter of fact, it is this latter approach that offers the maximum pleasure, real pleasure and gratification, otherwise known as happiness. Stop chasing happiness and start chasing challenge. Privilege of being able to do something in this world, and that's when you come into your happiness. So, let's return to our original story. Now we understand why the Rebbe told Reb Reuven Dunin it was a Hassid that lived, a man that lived before the times of the Baal Shem Tov. Because once the Baal Shem Tov taught axiomatic ideas, you can't choose what's expedient. You can't choose what's good for you. You want to experience the world to come? No, nice. But you have to choose financial resources, because only in that way can you help other people. Because there's too much to do, and only we can do it. And God is relying on us. And as the Rebbe taught over and over and over, if you can do something, you must do something. It's nice to experience heaven, but it's absolutely critical to get the work down here, to make our unique contribution. So let's all choose riches and make the most of it. That and nothing else in life can grant us the pleasure we all crave. The whole world is watching, and the whole world is waiting for us to do our part. Oh, and in case you're wondering, the concept of no pressure, it's not a thing in Chabad. There's simply too much to accomplish. So think of it not as pressure, but as great advice and guidance and energy for you to unleash. You're welcome.
Thank you.
The Rohr Jewish Learning Institute has the largest collection of Jewish media online. Hit subscribe for more.